The time is finally here. Iron Oak's very successful tabletop turn-based RPG, For the King, now has a sequel. But was the nearly 6-year wait worth it? Well, let's talk about first impressions from an avid FTK fan. I've spent nearly 200 hours suffering in the world of Fahrul. I've unlocked and played all of FTK1's characters, unlocked everything from the lore store, and beaten all the campaigns. Well, except Lost Civ, but we don't talk about that one. All that being said, I feel qualified to give my opinions on the second iteration of the game. Feel free to tell me how my opinions are wrong in the comments below. So let's get going. First, let's pick the low-hanging fruit. The game's visuals are fantastic. The world looks more alive, detailed. I mean, just look at the differences in the dungeons. It really is a beautiful game. Performance-wise, FTK1 had some weird random frame drops, and so far, despite the reviews, the game has run magnificently for me with no issues. As is with most modern games, unfortunately they come out riddled with bugs, and many FTK2 players are experiencing exactly this. I tend to ignore this, as typically within a few weeks most, if not all of these bugs will get sorted out through hotfixes and patches. In fact, at the time of this video, I think they've released 2 hotfix patches that look to have fixed a lot of the issues. The other thing I've noticed is the sea of complaints about how hard the game is. Look, I know not everyone played the first game, but I'm sure the same complaint plagued the comments there. The game is difficult and unforgiving by design. As you progress through the game, you gather these things called lore books, and as you complete certain tasks in the game, you unlock the ability to buy new armor, weapons, characters, and encounters with these books. All of these exist to help you as you play more to make your future campaigns easier. And look, if that doesn't help you, I'm sorry. Get good. Honestly, sounds like a skill issue. Alright, on to the actual game. The first thing that you notice is that your maximum party is now 4. And also, as you enter combat, your characters are scattered across a 4x2 grid. Immediately, this is a huge change in how the combat works. In the first game, the only real placement tech you could do was having your middle character have high evasion, so that you had a higher chance to dodge AoE attacks. It was common to put Hunter in the middle as he had high starting speed and evasion. Now that you can move characters around a grid, either creating a wall to protect your weaker character, or allowing your blacksmith and other tanky characters to do their job and just soak damage, it creates an entirely new and fresh combat dynamic. I've really enjoyed this combat system. By default, you get 1 attack turn and 1 turn for non-combat things. This means moving in the grid, party healing, and changing weapons does not take your full combat turn like it did in FTK1. This is a massive change to the combat system and makes it much more complex and engaging than the first game. If you're not aware, FTK characters are class-based, meaning there are some characters that are spec'd to use magic weapons, some spec'd for ranged weapons like bows, and some that just run at enemies with a big old hammer and smack them on the head. And then there can be a mix of stats. Prior to your adventure, you essentially create your own character's loadout. This is a new thing in FTK2, where you can pick different weapons, armors, herbs, and even talents and traits that can help tailor your characters to your playstyle. This is another component of the game that gets unlocked as you play more, and another thing you can spend your lore books on. So I've talked a lot about things that I like, and I could keep going. But let's talk about some stuff I don't like. There are really only 2 categories in the game I think need work, or rather more player configuration or mod support. First is the UI. FTK1 didn't have the best UI, but it wasn't that bad and you could get used to its quirks. My general complaint was that the UI and the inventory was hard to navigate and buggy. Not being able to view your other character's inventory during certain times made no sense, and in FTK2 it's honestly gotten even worse. Where in FTK1 the character stats was easily read below the health and XP bar, now because of the addition of another character, you have to click on each character to see their stats. No more easily comparing stats among party members with just a glance. Now you've got to manually click through your characters to see what their stats are. It is, however, nice to see the stats called out when a weapon drops for a specific stat check, but I would really like to have the full stats of each character always on screen. Similarly, in FTK 1, it's difficult to see your other character's inventory when it's not their turn. This makes going into shops and buying weapons and gears for other characters difficult, since it isn't easy to see what they already have. The combat UI is decent. It's easy to see how many moves I have and which moves takes your combat and non-combat turn. My only gripe here is that it's difficult to see and understand what immunity and status effects the enemies have. You can't seem to hover over enemies' immunities with a pop-up telling you more info about them. The status effects like shock and burn are displayed on the enemy, and there's also a little sound effect, but it seems like on some of the larger enemies, it's just not obvious. On the timeline, there is a ridiculously tiny icon next to the enemy profile picture that does display their current status effect. It took me like 10 hours to notice that was even there. Maybe it's just me, it just doesn't seem like most of the info I would want to see is there, and it's just not really pleasant to look at. I don't want to sit here for the next hour talking about issues with the UI. I honestly think the UI just needs a complete overhaul. I don't know what that would look like, but I just know this isn't it. It's clunky, difficult to navigate, and sometimes you get this weird overlapping of screens, and it seems to be missing some otherwise critical information I would always want displayed. The last thing I feel I need to talk about in my impressions is probably the most controversial one. The game timers are not fun. As soon as you start your campaign, you're greeted with an hourglass at the top, where if you get 3 of them, your game is over. Straight up, you lose if you get 3 of these. I understand forcing players to rush and not piddle around exploring the map was in the first game, but it was much less punishing, and I didn't like it in the first game either. Look, it's not a skill issue. I understand the point is to force you to make calculated decisions as to where to go and what side quests to complete. It's part of the strategy of the game, and I can play successfully with it on, but I just like to take my time and explore the map. I think my issues with timers would be fixed with some additional player chosen config. I'm hopeful this gets added either officially or otherwise. At least in the second area, your timer is in the form of waves of enemies that continue to attack you, so you could in theory farm and take your time in this area, but the levels of enemies scales with your character level, so it does get pretty difficult to deal with them if you take too long. All in all, I think FTK2 is a lot of fun. 10 hours in and I'm loving it. With some UI changes and additional player configs, I think it can be a lot of fun to players at all skill levels. The changes to combat and this new loadout system makes for a ton of replayability. So many different combinations of classes and loadout choices is a much needed improvement to the playstyle variety from the first game. They released the game with a roadmap, with the first big DLC dropping in 2025, with some smaller free patches and DLC along the way. I look forward to the coming weeks and months to see how the game evolves and what additional content Iron Oak decides to add to the game. While the game does need work, the game is a lot of fun and I definitely recommend it. Thanks for watching. If you've been playing this game, please let me know what you think of it so far. I've also been streaming this on Twitch, so feel free to drop in and provide some backseat gaming. See you later.